good for it. I know what it's called. It's called, oh, no, I'll just plug this in. It's way easier on my computer. So are we, oh, just let me know when we're streaming.
It is streaming.
Oh, it is? Okay.
Yeah, just give me a second, I'll
Oh, yeah, okay. And Adrian has to get set up. So, okay.
But you can see hi.
Yeah, I'll say hi and everything. Hi. Is it totally crooked?
Yeah, it's kind of. Okay.
Hi, Mary and Satinia, if you're on yet. I don't know, can you see on the chat whether they're on? Anyway, okay, so we're going to be just watching a couple more docs. Three are watching. Great. Hey, everyone. So what we're going to be doing today is we'll just watch a few of the finished productions, and then we're just going to really talk about the nitty-gritty of planning and preparing for a shoot, and maybe we'll talk a little bit about writing proposals and some places you can apply for funding and that whole process. So I'm just going to turn this to, oh, it is on laptop, darn it. Sorry. Oh, okay, there we go. Let's see if this sound works. Yeah, sound works. Okay, so for people who are at home, if they want to watch it properly, if you can Google, maybe you can type this in the chat. It's actually it's the Vimeo number. It's 88905-894. 905894. So you can just watch that. Now this project, yesterday we watched Phoebe's and Clarence and Alethea and Brendan's project and Rowena's project called Keeping the Light. Anyways, we'll put a link up for all these, and we'll actually post all of these films. Turn the lights off. So we can just talk a little bit after about how. Okay, here we go.
Home is always where your story begins, and sometimes you need to go back to that to rewrite the next chapter. Where I'm from, there's no like huge, massive buildings. It's all just like land. So when you leave like a place like Moose Factory, which is in the Moose River Basin, and you go to like a big city, there's a huge culture shock, and it makes you long for just the openness. And when you're in a city and you're in a park, and you see things like Canada geese, those are the things that really trigger those memories and the longing to go out on the land, go to camps, go hunting, and that's just the traditions that were passed down generations and generations. Those things don't change. In April, some of the ice is still melting. It's preparing to break up, and then the river flows again. And that's the big signal of our culture that the geese are coming, so spring's coming and summer's coming. One of the first trips that geese make is the one south to go to their summer homes, but they always go back home. I mean, I think that they belong up north, and so do I, but I have that sort of migratory streak too. But home is where you find that well in you again. And when I lived other places, like, I remember being really homesick in Ireland one time on a trip, and I was sitting at St. Stephen's Green, and there was a couple of geese there, and I used my goose call. They were scared, I think. They were wondering what was going on, because I don't think they hear that, especially in an urban setting. We need to hunt geese to survive, and that's still something that's true today. And I get homesick, or I've gotten homesick, when I notice the change of the seasons. That's when I long to be out on the land with family and doing all those things that sustain our people for so many hundreds of years.
So nice to see the geese this morning. That was a nice surprise. And we have a healthy respect and need to keep a certain distance from each other. But I didn't startle them, I just looked at them and watched them. And I think if they were able to read my mind, they could tell that I was imagining them on my lap and me taking off all their feathers, undressing them. Undressing them in that Cree way.
My family goes hunting in April, and we go near the land that my father grew up in. My father was born in the bush. It's not far from our reserve there. And it was the first time in my life that I went into the blind with my dad, actually, to wait for the geese.
My father was able to show me firsthand the skills that I needed, that, setting up of the blind and the positioning of the decoys. And the decoys are replicas. They're larger than real life replicas of the Canada geese. And one of the most thrilling things for me was to use my goose call.
It was probably one of the most. I felt it was sacred because I felt like I had a connection to who my people are still.
And I didn't notice the geese at first, and then when I started using my goose call, their wings tipped and they turned and they flew right over my father's blind. It was thrilling. It was actually seeing the result of my call. And then I had this overwhelming sense of connection to my father, who was directly across from us, and a connection to my grandparents, four grandparents. And I had at this moment just a feeling of everything that I was taught, all the small things, sort of were able to culminate in that moment. And I felt excited that those moments could happen again. You know.
Wow. That's amazing.
Adrian, is the sound working? Is your sound working? Okay, great. Okay, so that, whoops. That project was started with Docks North, at Docks North. And then I guess they got some, a bit of Canada Council funding to finish it off. But it was kind of neat because we had Ellen Lundby, a Norwegian filmmaker from like a Sami filmmaker from Norway. She came and showed her film, and then she stayed on as a mentor for Docks North, and then they formed this team, Nadine and Phoebe Sutherland and Ellen Lundby Astrid, and then they just did their shooting for one day. That's all we really had. And Shirley was also in that team. Sorry. And then, well, then maybe Shirley, you could just talk a little bit about how you guys planned and proceeded and shot.
We did a lot of shooting in Thunder Bay, but it morphed. And then I was in school when they were, so they filmed in Moosonee, I think. Isn't it Moosonee there where Phoebe's from?
Yeah, and Moose Factory.
Oh, Moose Factory, okay. Moose something. And I think she even went to Norway. She was planning on going to Norway anyways for part, and then so Ellen was would have filmed her in Norway, and then Nadine filmed her, and I think she also filmed, like, did some of it herself in Moose Factory. But the original one was we were having her on a city bus, and we were chasing the bus with the camera, and we were trying to call the geese at in the LU grounds. There were geese there, and we were trying to call them to come, and the geese would like fly in the other directions, like what the heck? They're not used to hearing somebody calling them, I guess. They're city birds. That's what we call them anyways. But yeah, so it kind of changed from our original thing, but I can't find it anymore, but I had made a book for a class out of the film too. Like just took some still pictures from it and made it about a little girl who wanted to go hunting with her parents, the geese, but they told her that she first had to learn the call, and so then it was like in the film there that she didn't know how to do the call properly, and everybody was startled and took off in the other direction, and the blackbirds even flew off, and then she finally she was so proud of herself because she found it and the geese came, so then she was happy she could go hunting. But it was like a storybook, like a interactive storybook, so that when you press it you would hear the sounds kind of thing, but I can't find it anymore. It's like one of those programs that you make it on, and I guess it somehow they take it off after.
So it was a multimedia project?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Fantastic.
So, well, what I'll try to do, I can't find any, but maybe in a bit we'll be able to find, maybe Adrian can help us find, or Sandy, do you know how to find Looking for Magic, or do you know?
Bay Street.
Excuse
me, Bay Street Film Festival computer had it on their computer. And,
yeah, but I know we had a version posted, no? Okay, we just have the DVD. Okay, well anyway, we'll try to find that another time. So let me just look at. So what I want to talk about today was really sort of the nitty-gritty of planning and some of the tools that you use in terms of you know, creating your schedule and you know, planning your project and how you're going to go forward. In my experience, the most important thing has always been preparation and research. Because I do a lot of films that are historical, so it means sometimes even years of research and then finding the thread that you want to follow in terms of making your film. And oftentimes, you know, doing historical research and storytelling and finding those stories, it's kind of like it becomes it really becomes like an onion that you're peeling back, and then you just keep discovering new things, and it's easy to get off track in terms of, you know, like you find this story and that story, and everything becomes really you find out that no matter what story you're trying to tell, it has all these complexities in them. But that complexity is really hard to translate and to put forward on a film project, where people are going to sit down and they're going to just have you know, 54 minutes or half an hour or even 8 minutes to get one or two ideas. And you know, even in a feature documentary, really, there's really only so many ideas. If you throw so much information onto the screen because you really want to get this and that, in the end, what you lose is you lose your engagement with your audience, and you lose sort of the whole purpose of the exercise, which is making people at least think about one or two things, and that leaves them with something to ponder afterwards. Otherwise, you know, you have all the example of things that are just really entertainments, right? That's, you know, like the bulk of stuff that's on TV, these reality shows and that kind of thing. So my most important lessons were in the planning and preparation of that went and all of the pre-production work that goes into making any kind of film. And where you start is just writing down, first of all, what is the main idea of your film? What is the most important message that you want to get across? So in some ways, like, and every application that you write, you always have to give like one line basically just to describe your project and what story you're going to tell in it. So maybe I'm just going to look at my latest proposal that I did, and I had a project description. So this is a film that I'm working on now, and there's several people in this room who are working on me. Anyways, the project is called One Woman's North, The Incredible Journey of Sheila Burnford. So here's my just one-line project description, or two-line actually. This project is a celebration of one woman's journey from post-war Britain to northern Canada. She not only embraced the rugged land she adopted as her home, but also the Indigenous people she encountered in the far northern reaches of Ontario and the Arctic. And then then I go on to, you know, give a fuller synopsis, so that's just a paragraph. So even though you're all going to be, you know, going out and making a, you know, an 8-minute, a small project, it's really important to sit down and collectively try to figure out what is sort of like a one-line description of what you're trying to achieve, what is the story that you're trying to tell. Then, you know, then you get into like kind of a synopsis, which is, you know, that will give you a kind of an idea of what you're going to do with this story. So here is another example. I don't know why I always get these really complicated stories. Like this woman is a completely complex a woman who has done all these incredible things. She was like a pilot in the 1920s. She was during the Blitz. She was an ambulance driver, and then she emigrated to Canada, and then she wrote this novel, The Incredible Journey, which became a Disney movie, and then she really made friends with the woman who was an artist, and the two of them together spent over a decade traveling to remote northern reserves and just hanging out. And Susan Ross would paint, and she would write or learn how to fish or learn how to, you know, pluck a goose or do any of that, and then she put that into a book. And then they went off to the Arctic and did that. And then she did other stories. So I didn't want to do like one long film, so I had an idea that I would make 15 short vignettes. So they would be very short films using all different styles of production. And then maybe they would come together as like a feature-length documentary, or maybe they would never come together. Maybe they would just be an interactive online kind of film. And actually I got money for this, so it worked. And it's a sort of a departure from other projects that I've done. But I still followed the same path, which is, you know, do all your research, find out as much as you can, and then, you know, you make a list of who you should contact, who could possibly be in this film, how could I find out more about her. So the first thing I did was, you know, made a list of people that knew her, and then I tried to find her children. Obviously, because I just did a little Google. There's nothing written about her. There's really nothing. And I found, and then I was working on another project, and this filmmaker says, yeah, her daughter, Sheila Burnford's daughter, it lives in Yellowknife, and I know who she is, and I can give you her contact. So I did that. So the next phase was, you know, going and making that initial contact. I found out as much as I could about the person that I was going to contact before I contacted them. And I found out that she had a PhD in literature about northern writers. And so I could download her PhD. I read that, and then I found some kind of a connection, and then I made that contact. And then I had the luxury of being able to go up there on another project and connect with her in person. So the process of basically finding your subjects. And the very first film that I did was called Rosies of the North. And it was about women who worked in the airplane factory here in Thunder Bay. So, like, I moved here, and my parents are from here, my grandparents, but I didn't know there was any connection. But there was an oral history project at the university talking about women who had worked in that factory building airplanes in the Second World War. And I'll just Google it. Anyway, so this was my first film, and so I heard about this. So then I had to like find these.
Give me the address or online?
You just Google Rosies of the North. But why is it blocked? Sorry, bear with me here. Well, I have it on my Vimeo channel, so there. Okay, Roses of the North, Vimeo. Roses of the North. There. Okay, so anyway, so this is a film about, oh, jeez. Okay, well, maybe we'll just watch like a minute or two. And then I can just talk about the preparation and the research that went into this film and like how I organized my shoot.
Being a gunner.
Margaret Cook's been waiting 60 years to get into this cockpit. Last time she saw a Helldiver bomber, she was too busy building it to go joyriding.
That feel comfortable? Good. And when we take off, of course, it'll tend to kind of slide you backwards for a minute, but then once we're in level flight, it should be okay.
No problem at all.
You comfy?
You bet.
Okay. Well, I'm going to go get my flight suit on, and we're going to pre-flight the airplane, and we'll be taking off in a few minutes. All right.
Ready.
Look forward to flying with you.
I look forward to flying with you. I feel like an airbag.
Oh my, that's so nice to see my old place. Oh dear. That's beautiful. Beautiful. Beautiful to see. They're part of our life. I couldn't help but cry, you know, it was so sentimental. Yeah, the darn thing. The little burgers, they were so nice. They brought us together. Oh yeah. You women did a good job. But you know, the men, they thought they knew it all, but they didn't, didn't they?
This is a war story about fighters and bombers and the Battle of Britain and the War in the Pacific. But it all takes place about as far from London or Iwo Jima as you can get, smack in the middle of the Canadian bush. Today, it's part of Thunder Bay, but in those days, it was just Fort William, Lakehead Port and Lumbertown. There wasn't even a road to the rest of Canada. Not when you'd risk your last silk stockings on, anyway. Then along came a couple of airplanes that would put us on the map and give us a whole new way to look at our lives. In the middle of 1940, the news from Europe was downright scary.
From airfields all along the conquered coast of Europe, wave on wave of Goering's bombers launched their long-awaited assault in England. Their tactic, to drive the RAF from British skies, to spread civilian panic, prepare the way for the invading army. Their Heynckos had thundered over Poland, their Dorniers had blasted Holland, their Stukas had shattered the army of France. Only Britain remained. All will England remember the days when the Spitfires and the Hurricanes first roared in, and the fortunes of war were written in white trails of vapor in the sky.
A few fast little fighters, most of them Hawker Hurricanes, were all that stood between Britain and a full-scale German invasion. But they were getting shot down just about as fast as they could take off. If the jackboots weren't to march across the Channel, Britain was going to need help. That's where we came in. Canadian factories and Canadian workers could mean the difference between survival and disaster.
In a war where the loss of precious equipment may bring swift defeat, this is Canada's greatest task, to mobilize her mighty industrial resources into a never-failing arsenal. And on this battlefront of national organization, women fight side by side with men.
You bet we did. More than 1 million of us between 1939 and 1945. by the time it was all over, we'd shaken up a lot more than the Nazis. When it came to building airplanes, we women did just about every job there was, from soldering fuse panels, like Margaret Cook, and building the wings, like Nina Harney, who riveted the sheet metal skins with her partner, Mary Sundell, or wrestling an acetylene torch to weld the frames, like Irene DePiro.
Women were steadier welders. It didn't go over well with the men. But
anyway, okay, so here we had a very complicated story. Well, what I wanted to do is talk about these women, these incredible women, and there were dozens of them still living in Thunder Bay and then all across Canada. They had married and gone away. The other part of the story, which I introduced later, is about Elsie McGill, she was the first woman engineer in Canada. She was the first woman to have a master's in aeronautical engineering. And I think she was the first woman in the world to design an airplane. And she got a job at the factory before the war to design a trainer plane, which didn't get selected and it didn't become, but it was apparently like the sweetest, but because it was this woman who had designed it, it didn't really go anywhere. But her mother, by the way, was Canada's first woman to have a Bachelor of Arts, and she became Canada's first woman judge. And they grew up in Vancouver, friends of Emily Carr, and Elsie had taken art lessons from Emily Carr. But anyway, so I have this complicated story, and so first of all, I just gathered as much information, met all these women, got each one of their stories, and I ended up, I think, interviewing about 20 women intensely, and maybe over 100 people, men and women, but mostly the women. And then Elsie McGill was dead, so I just had all the archival I could find of her and information, and then found her stepdaughter and her relatives and pieced that together. But that's the whole research phase. But then how do you make a film out of all of that? And you have to write it first. So you have to make a treatment. And I didn't know how to do that. I had done one application for another little short film, and in this case, it was a massive amount of taking all of this, sometimes oral history that I had gathered, and then creating a story that you could almost read. And that's basically because that's what the film board demanded. And it was like a long time before they would. In fact, my first application I made to the Ontario Arts Council, somebody told me, and I made a beautiful proposal. It had like photos of the women, and I did a huge layout of it, and I sent it in, and I didn't get any money. And then I applied, so then I looked around and I applied for a heritage grant, and I changed my proposal to focus on the multi-ethnicity of all these women, women that came from all over from Western Canada mainly, and then the women here who got these first good jobs. And then I got a bit of money for that. And then I went to the film board again, and then because I had gotten a bit of money, then they let me do it. But anyway, but actually I had moved here, so they wanted me to apply to Toronto, and the head of the film board phoned me up. I couldn't believe that they weren't going to support this project, and she said, well, we've already done a film on women in war, so we're not going to do another one. And this is a quaint local oral history project, and that was the head of the English production in Toronto. And I said, well, you did a film about women in war in the First World War. Would you say that about, well, we've already done films about men in the First World War. We won't bother with the Second World War. So anyway, so that was the kind of thing. But it just made me have to work harder to hone my ideas and come up with the focus, right? And then if you're ever doing a film on someone who's dead, it's really a hard pitch to say, yes, I'll have this, I'll have that, I have heard personal letters, I have newspaper clipping, I found an archival thing, and she was this amazing woman, like, and then here you have all these women who are lively and alive, and let's put them in. And so, so really, it's trying to focus on what are the most important things that you want to say, but also it's who is going to tell the story, because you have numerous people who could, you don't just pick up your camera and then I'm going to, oh, the first person that you find who was worked in the factory, they're not going to be the people that are going to really make your film fly. And so in this case, I wanted to pick women that were representative of different experiences. One had been was a mother, and then one two had been friends and they had found romance there. Another one had worked with as a not only on the shop floor but also with Elsie McGill, and she had worked on the hurricanes and the Helldivers. And so then we had like the so that those women, they were in a lot of ways cast. And so Margaret Cook, who you see at the beginning of the film, she's the one that I picked to go up in the plane, because she had worked on that plane and the hurricane, and she had worked with Elsie McGill. So she was the choice. And then, so picking your subjects, the people, and the only way you can do that is like a lot of pre-interviews and talking with them. And I know some people have been frightened in the past. It's like, well, if I talk to them before and I don't interview them when they're like fresh, you know, maybe I'll miss something. So I should like film that interview, and then you might be satisfied that you got everything. But I think that's a fool's game. I think the most important thing is that when you first, as much research as you can to find the people, listen to their stories, and even then when you go back, when you're preparing, you know exactly what story you want to pull out of them again. They always do it better. And then there's always new information and things you never even thought about. So, but you need to do as much preparation and pre-interviews. So even if it's just getting on the phone, you guys have a very short time, but phone around all the possible people that could be in your film if you're doing a documentary, and talk to them and as much as you can, and get to know as much as what their story is. And then you think about it, re-listen to it, or you take notes, and then it's like, oh, this is the story. This person was talking about this particular thing, and so that's the focus I'm going to have. So that's, and I had like I had a wonderful mentor who is Norma Bailey. She's a fantastic filmmaker, and I trained with her. But she basically, that was her thing, was like, think of, even if you're doing a documentary, think of it in terms of casting for the right people. And in this case, I wanted to have a woman who is a welder. I wanted to have people who are riveters. I wanted to have someone who worked in the office with Elsie McGill. And even, you know, having 4 women and then another woman, and then I have like some other small sideline stories that weave in, but the casting is important. Then, once you get your story, like these are, I had done all these interviews, and then I just made a clip of, these are the 10 themes that I wanted to talk about. It was like women's opportunity, first job, what that meant to them. And then what it was like being a woman in an all-male kind of atmosphere and working, and then what it was like to have your brothers and your family, and they're off at war and they were dying, and what was that like? And then what was the actual job that you were doing, and how did you do it? And then how did you feel, you know, like the pride or whatever? And then what was the legacy of that experience? Because all those women, the day the war ended, there was 3 that kept their jobs out of the 3,000 that were working in the factory. They left and made room for the returning men from the war who got those jobs. And the women, many of them, you might think, well, they all got married and had kids and all that. That isn't exactly the case. But my theory, after talking to all these women, was that their generation of women, they had all new expectations, and they had new expectations for their daughters. And those daughters were in the 70s, in the women's liberation movement. And so I argue, or that's how I feel, is that those women's experience during the war did change them, didn't change it permanently, their situations, but they had new expectations and new opportunities, and many of their daughters went off to university and had all different expectations that a woman could obviously do anything because their mothers had done anything. So anyway, so that's the whole thing of then, honing down from those pre-interviews the kind of what you want to get. So then you prepare your questions. Your pre-interviews, and that can be rambling. Just find out about everything about them. Find out, and then at the same time, what you're doing is you're building a relationship. Because you're listening to their stories, you want to know everything about them. You don't want to come with like, oh, here I've got 10 questions, I don't care about anything else. I don't care about, that you have 9 grandchildren and one of them is going to be a concert pianist. And no, you need to find out, get them to tell you their life story, and then you build a relationship of trust. They entrust their story to you. Then you go and then you figure out, okay, this is interesting, and this woman, sometimes people all have the similar experiences, but then you hone it down to your questions that you want to do when you're filming. And, and once you have a crew and everything, you don't have the luxury to spend all of this. And then if you shoot in film, and I've shot several documentaries on film, you're not going to be doing a 1-hour interview on film. And so then you've already prepared. And then sometimes I would still do a long interview, but I would tap the cameraman and the film would go on and off and we'd just do audio. But it led for efficiency. And this film, I think we had 12 hours of footage for a 1 hour. Now with people with digital, they could end up with 50 hours of material. But I think that the best advice I can give you when you're thinking about your project is the more preparation and then thinking about what are the stories that really struck you when you were talking to that person? When were they most animated? When was the thing that touched you emotionally? Then those are the things you're going to get when you set up. The other thing is, so even just in the case of I had done research on any films that were done about women in war work. So I knew that First World War film that had been done, but it was done with 90-year-old women. They were all at home. They had their crocheting, and they were quite lively, but they were sitting in their homes talking about what it was like in the First World War when they were doing armaments or whatever. And then it was like the archival footage. But I wanted to show my characters in their location and with the things they built, and not in their homes with their crocheted arm rests or whatever. So we're lucky the factory is still there. So I decided for all of my interview, once I figured out what stories I wanted each one to tell, then I thought about where that the location where we were going to film those interviews was going to also tell a story, right? So, and I do this with all my films, it's really important is where you're telling the story, not just the story that the person is telling. So I brought them back to the factory, and this one I have them in the movie theater watching the archival. That's how I wanted to introduce them. So that was there. And then, of course, I wanted to put those women in contact with the airplane that they had built. Well, this is, and then also in this treatment when I had to write and convince the reader, in order for them to give me money and funding for this, I had to convince them that these stories are worth telling and how I'm going to tell them in an interesting way. And then, and I had to do like 5 treatments. It was awful. And then a woman named Bonnie Dickey came to my rescue and helped me, because I had all this information. I had all on cards, and she said, okay, just think of the coolest shot. What would be the coolest shot that you could imagine to tell this story? And I said, well, one of these women's in an airplane, right? And I just thought, well, hurricane. That's how little I knew about a hurricane, is like a fighter, that's just the fighter pilot in there. But luckily, the Helldiver had that rear gunner. But that's like the only Helldiver in the world that was left, and it was actually flying, and it was run by this, they had it in, I found it. And there was an air show here in Thunder Bay, and I convinced them to invite these guys, and they came for just the gas money that it would cost to fly the plane here. And everyone in Thunder Bay has a connection to that plane, because almost everyone who has some connection that worked in that factory during the war. And so that was my cool shot. And they said, oh, well, you can have like a media person, or Kelly, you can go up in the plane. I'm like, no. This plane is one of these women is gonna go in this plane. And so I interviewed the women at the airport with the plane. And then the next important location was the factory. And so we brought the women into the factory. So the welder was in the welding department when she talked about it. The riveters, and then they went and they were talking to all the riveters and the welders and everything, and it was like amazing, the connection, and because they were experts at that stuff. They didn't even forget how to do it. So that's the other thing is, so that, and what that meant was scouting location. So I went there, and in fact, because I had so much trouble convincing people that this was more than a little quaint oral history project for our community, I went and I decided I'm going to do a radio story. I'm going to do a radio, and actually it ended up on Sunday morning, a half-hour documentary. And I went into the factory, and then luckily one of the managers at the factory was a historian, and he'd written the history, and he showed me the card catalog with all of the, then I found out my grandfather, my grandmother, and a lot of great uncles and that, they all worked in that factory. My grandmother worked there even too. She was a Rosie. So then you just keep, by doing things, and by scouting the location, then you get even more ideas on how you can do it. So those are the things that it goes into the planning. And so first is the idea, then is the who is going to be featured, or if it's your personal story, like what are the few main ideas that you're going to try to get across in your film. And obviously if you're doing like an 8-minute, you really only can have like 1 or 2 ideas. And then you rely on all the rest of it, like your locations and the place and everything, to add all the complexity and all the layers, and that's how you get to it. And then when you're doing it, then when you're actually on location and you're getting the shots, you've already decided, well, I need a shot of this, I need a shot of that. So then you have your shot list, and then when you're actually doing it, something magical happens usually. You always get more, but you only get it if you are well planned, and you've got permission. You've made a relationship with the person in the factory, and you go there and you scout it, and you look around, and then when you're scouting it, then you see, oh, this is the time clock. Oh, hey, we've got to get these. Then that's an idea. I've got to do a shot of the women, their old punch clock that they punched in on every single day. It's there, right? And here's the place where they would get all the nuts and bolts or whatever, the rivets. to bring to their thing. And then here is their work card that has all their hours and the day that they were. But if you hadn't gone and scouted it and seen all of those things, you would just like get the women, get permission, and then go in there and you film. You would miss all those little bonus things. And then when you're on the day, when you bring those women into the factory, it's like amazing. They had a whole new other experience. And then you have to make sure that the other part of planning any production is that your crew knows what you're trying to do, that you have a crew that is listening and is as thinking about the project as much as you. And that so you can rely on your crew members. They pick up on another cool thing. And that's a whole team building. But if you didn't do any team building, you just like come at 9 in the morning and then we're going to go, and you assume that everybody has checked their particular equipment, and then you end up there. And this was my thing. I didn't realize this. I had just hired a sound guy. He had a really great resume. I didn't work with him. And he said, oh, I want to have like a student as my boom person. And anyway, so all of this magic happened. We get the airplane that these women built to fly into Thunder Bay. We get permission to film at the airport. And my sound guy was absolutely useless. And he barely even got, like, luckily I listened to it. So like the first interview, it was toast, right? And then, and I had like 3 days, because the film board wouldn't really give me the money. They said, okay, you can have, the women had organized a reunion, there was going to be the air show, and they're like, oh, well, you can do it next year. It's like, no, I have to do it now. Well, all these women can have a reunion, like, no. Anyway, so then if you are depending on a crew and you haven't even done a test shoot or working with them, then, you know, unless they're really the great professional people that they are, anyway, there was a lot of, there were some interviews at the airplane that I couldn't use. It just was so heartbreaking, right? Luckily, the one with her and everything turned out well. And then the second time, then after those 3 days, then I got to do another shoot, and then I had learned my lesson as a new filmmaker. I got a real professional crew and lighting and the proper team and everything. And then, you know, and we worked together and we tested all the equipment together and figured out what we were doing before we went out and started shooting. Or else we would do something that was very simple, something that was uncomplicated in our first day or two. So that, the next phase, of course, is you know, like you're writing your ideas down, honing, you know, getting your question list, and then getting your shot list and figuring out all your locations, because locations add so much to your understanding of the content. Then preparation of all of your equipment, making sure that your radio mic, that you have all the batteries, that you have all the cable, that you test everything out before you go on location. And then you need someone to make sure that they will do the paperwork of like keeping track of everything. In the old days, the cameraman would always do a camera report sheet, and the sound person would do a sound report sheet. You would write down everything that was doing, because then later in the post-production, you know, I started out as an assistant editor. I was syncing up the rushes, which was like synchronizing the sound to the picture. But that happened maybe months and months later. But I had all the written reports. I had the camera roll reports. I had the sound roll reports. With video and digital today, people just go out, shoot a bunch of stuff. They don't write anything down. And sometimes you don't have to, but it's important to do that, to have somebody keep track of it. And then there is the question of permissions and signing a release form, which isn't binding. There's nothing that says that if they sign the release form, you can just exploit that image or that thing that you've recorded any way you want. It's kind of an agreement that they have given you permission, and then if you didn't have the sheet or whatever, you can get it on camera. But to me, ethically, it doesn't mean that you can just do whatever you want with that. And I have always worked with, especially if there's anything sensitive or whatever, I carry on a relationship. I invite. It's always tricky. You don't really want to do it, but you need to do it, as you have your subject give you feedback, and because they have transferred their story to you, you are completely manipulating it and creating your story from their story, and so they need to have a say. So even though they signed a release form, which is important to do, it doesn't mean you can do whatever with it, because you have their trust, and you have to continue that relationship. And I know filmmakers who did very, very personal stories, one-on-one stories with people, and then they had, and by the end of the filming process, they detested that person they were making a film about, and they were like, I never want to see this person again. But and maybe they found out things, like too many things that they didn't want to know, and anyways, but you can't break the sacred trust of those relationships that you made, and you have to always put your love and respect into it to make that good film. And that's why maybe I think I've never made a film where I have like a person I really don't like, you know, like some big corporate person or whatever, and I want to show them in a horrible light, like that journalist. That's a whole other kind of filmmaking. All of the films that I do with the people, it's because I care about those people and I decide to pick their story. But also, some stories you just can't include because it's too complicated. It makes your film, and so that, but that's another thing, is that you don't want to ever let people know that, you know, you're guaranteeing that their story that they're so passionate about, they have shared with you, is going to end up in the film either. So anyway, so you have your research, your pre-interviews, you have your location scouting, and your equipment prep. And so you're starting to see, right? It doesn't matter if it's a fiction film, it's a little short thing. You need all those phases. And then when you start shooting it, then there's no time to like send somebody out for batteries then you could lose that incredible moment that will happen, that you will never get back. But if you are prepared, you're going to be there for that incredible moment. And then sometimes if it isn't, anyway, there's you know, that's how you get the magic of that. And then of course, it's also making use of the relationships that you build with your crew, that your team of people, so that you listen to them and you get some ideas. And then you quickly find out if there's people that are just there, they just are doing it for money. If you happen to be lucky enough to get some money to do the film, then you quickly find out that it's really no fun working with people like that, because they don't add anything. And I had this horrible example, is that in this film, I wanted to find out, I couldn't find anybody who really knew Elsie McGill. So as these women were, you know, getting in touch with each other and helping me find women who had that experience, they decided, oh, we're going to make a reunion. So they made the reunion, but then I thought, okay, well, I want to really find out about Elsie McGill. So I've made a whole display about everything I had about Elsie McGill. And it was kind of on the stage at the reunion. And then, I just wanted to film and have the sound guy just be there, like as women were walking and stuff. And sure enough, you know, one woman went, oh yeah, and that's when she ran off with Soulsby and blah, 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 and they started talking, and I got, like, that's how I found Margaret Cook. She just came in for the reunion. Then I found this other woman who had been her secretary, and then I found all these people. Then I found the stepdaughter and the romance and all this stuff, and the relatives, and it was because I set that up. Well, the sound guy, he wasn't paying any attention. He didn't understand the whole purpose of making this display, and he was like, all of a sudden he realized, oh, this is really interesting. These people are interesting. So he was just like, oh, Sandy, oh, you were a welder? Oh, and he was like going off and like getting these stories. I had already done all these. I had focused. And then it was like, it was like, get over here. You know, listen to this. And anyway, so that was like such a learning experience, that if your crew, and it was my fault also, because I hadn't shared really that all my preparation and my strategy and why I was doing this. You know, I had just had him, he was supposed to be professional, but he wasn't paying attention. So you have to make your crew understand what you're trying to do, and that's not easy. But I know we had Michelle Latimer here. She's a great filmmaker and documentarian, and she would, like after the whole day's shoot and everything, she would email her crew. She had so many meetings, but she would email them like all her thoughts of the day and what she was planning to do the next day, and it was like amazing. I didn't do any of that kind of stuff, but I mean, I soon learned the folly of not really involving your crew, and so that they know exactly what you're doing, so that then you don't have to be explaining to them why you want to film this person in the welding department, right? And the sound person is like, oh, but it's really noisy here. It's like, I don't care. I want them, you have to figure out how we're going to get good sound in a noisy factory, because I don't want to do an interview in her quiet living room. I want her on the shop floor talking about it. So anyway, so these are all my practical, just some practical things. And I'm sure there's all kinds of things I've missed, but maybe what we can do as a sort of an exercise is work on some of the film ideas now that we're going to be shooting, and come up with, you know, as those two groups or three groups, what is the let's do the exercise of writing the one line description of what this film is going to be, and then we can just put our heads together and come up with, well, who would we talk to? What are the pre-interviews that we should do, or preparation? What are the elements that we can gather if you're going to do something that's all archival or map-based? What are the list of things that we need to do? And then let's make, how are we going to do it? So then we decide what kind of camera we're going to use, or how we're going to capture the sound. Let's figure out all the equipment that we need. Then let's think about locations. Where are we going to do these? Where are we going to go to? Obviously, for example, the idea of making a film about the bridge, you know, it would be good to, like, maybe, you know, do a ton of, like, do interviews or do whatever we can do about that bridge, right? And so that's an obvious location, but what are other locations, right? You know, the reserve, the gas pumps, whatever it is. And then same thing, Sandy, you know, what are the various places or locations, or where you can get those images and all that kind of stuff. So maybe we can just do it as a brief exercise, but then we should, like, break into groups and carry on with that. Because I think it's, yeah, no, we still have some time before we break for coffee. So maybe we could just do some now as a group, and just all of that thinking about all the pre-planning and that kind of thing. So, Shirley
Nicole texted me that she went to emerge because of her coughing yesterday. It was worse today, so she said she'll be back by the 3rd.
okay. Okay, well, that's no good. So, well, but that doesn't stop us from because we have 3 great projects, right? And you guys were thinking of maybe combining.
Or doing just one after another.
Okay, so.
Or maybe we were going to film them somehow at the same time, but then like, separate them after. We
right.
We're supposed to talk about it today.
Okay, yeah. Well, so let's talk about that now, because then maybe we'll find out. Okay, once you start making your list of this is what I want to do, this is what I want to do, maybe it would be much more efficient to have 2 teams doing 2 separate films, or not, you know, because if you're going to be working, once you get your location list, maybe all those locations will coincide, so then it'll be, then it is more practical, right? So probably you've already done some of that. But do you want to, Sandy, do you want to start your group and come up with, why don't we, okay, I have an idea. Why don't we break into the groups and just as an exercise come up with the one-line description, and then maybe a list of who's going to tell that story. You know, so what you would do in terms of like research later, and then we can each of us
okay, there is a question.
Present it. Okay, yeah.
From Mary.
Sure.
I have a project in mind too. Will we have time to shoot some scenes, clips today for feedback?
Oh, for us to share with her, or she's going to shoot something?
Yeah, so she has
yeah.
a project in mind, and she's asking whether if they shoot something, will there be time for feedback?
Right. Okay, well, Mary, well, the groups are doing that, and you're shooting it today. We'll just keep in touch, and then, we could happily give feedback. And because we're in the after this session, we're going to really, the teams are going to form, and they're going to do their pre-production work, and then we're going to break for lunch, and then people are going to go off and do their shoot, but we could reconvene and
okay, other question.
Share some things.
Yeah, so she has another post.
Right.
I have my storyboard done.
Ooh.
Audio ideas, etc. Can we go shoot?
Yes. Go for it. Yeah, love it. Yeah, it'll be so exciting to be able to see all of your work, and then so what we should do is meet back here today at like 4:30, and then maybe we can just share some of what we've done today, or even if it's just planning or a few things. Yeah, okay, so let's meet at least at 4:30. Aim to come back. So whatever you do in terms of the shoot, you'll do your shooting, or even if it's just pre-production, and then all day tomorrow is going to be the shoot. We can share it among ourselves at 4:30 today.
Am I able to pursue the idea of the little short film of Western Ontario, or are we locked into the 3?
No, I think you're one of the 3.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, well, I mean, I think you have to find somebody to work with you.
Okay.
So what we'll do right now, let's just break for 15 minutes into groups, and then we'll report back. Okay, so in 15 minutes, and Mary and Satinia, if you're there, then if you want to, we'll try to figure out so that you can report in to us. And I can just phone you up, Mary, if we can't do the video, like a Google Talks or whatever. Or anyway, we'll try to do that, okay? Is that good? Great.
Right, so
Okay, so we can just go offline for a bit. Yeah.
We did put it right.
Yeah, exactly. What do you? Okay.